A 1% gap is quietly destroying the American dream. Middle-income wages are up around 2%. Inflation is 3%. Year after year, that gap compounds into missed savings, delayed milestones, and debt. Today, we're breaking down how 5 years of price increases outpaced paychecks, why 24% of households are effectively living paycheck to paycheck, and what happens to an economy when consumer spending finally breaks. If you think you're doing everything right but still falling behind, the data will validate what you feel and reveal what comes next. Before we continue, hit subscribe so you never miss the latest updates. What does a 1% difference do to your wallet over 5 years? It feels harmless, like a rounding error. But if your pay grows about 2% a year while prices climb about 3%, that small spread becomes a slow leak you can't see until the bucket's half empty. Let's define the gap clearly. Take a middle-income worker earning $50,000. With 2% yearly raises, that paycheck becomes $51,000, then $52,020, and so on. Meanwhile, if prices rise 3% each year, the cost of the same basket of goods moves faster. The math says you're working just as hard for a shrinking slice of real buying power. You're not failing, the numbers are. The compounding is what stings. Start at $50,000. After year one, your nominal income is $51,000, but you need $51,500 to buy what $50,000 used to cover. You're already $500 behind in real terms. Year two, your income moves to $52,020, but prices have climbed to about $53,045 to match the original lifestyle. The real gap widens. By year three, the raise lands at roughly $53,060, while the inflation-adjusted target hovers near $54,636. Year four, $54,121 versus about $56,275. Year 5, around $55,203 versus $57,963. Across those 5 years, that 1% shortfall compounds into roughly $2,400 in lost purchasing power compared to where you started. You don't feel it in one big hit. You feel it as a steady thinning. You see it in small choices long before you notice the grand totals. One fewer bag of groceries per trip because the same cart costs $15 more than last year. A phone plan bumped down a tier, less data, fewer perks. Because the family bill creeps up. Oil change pushed a month. Brake pads delayed another paycheck. Each cut feels manageable. Together, they shape a new baseline where you settle for less even when you're earning more. Research points to the same pattern. After-tax wages for middle earners are up about 2% year over year, while inflation sits closer to 3%. That gap translates directly into less discretionary cash. So you start choosing between savings and gas, utilities or a medical copay. You kick an eye exam or a dental cleaning to next quarter, not out of neglect, but because the margin isn't there. This isn't about splurges, it's about necessities squeezing the middle of the month. Here's how the squeeze shows up in a week-by-week budget. Week 1, rent hits, and the auto pay takes a bigger bite. Week 2, the grocery run swaps brands, trims extras, and drops the coffee beans. Week 3, you postpone the car service and hope the squeak stays a squeak. Week 4, the utility bill reflects new surcharges, so you drag your streaming renewal into the next cycle. The card balance inches up even though you're not buying more. You're buying the same life at a higher price. When discretionary space shrinks, trade-offs harden. A $150 monthly transfer to savings becomes $75, then $0. The small emergency fund stops growing. Minimum payments on the card still go through, but principal barely moves. And if the car needs a repair, the fix lands on the same card with a higher rate than last year. That's how a narrow gap turns into a personal finance treadmill. Multiply those private decisions across millions of households. Fewer takeout nights, fewer sold-out concerts, fewer spur-of-the-moment purchases at big box stores, spending shifts toward groceries, gas, and utilities, and away from anything that can wait. Businesses feel that cooling. Inventory sits longer, promotions run earlier, hiring slows on the margin. The slowdown doesn't arrive as a headline, it starts as 1,000 small no's. So what does the 5-year bill come to? On that $50,000 starting point, the compounding 1% gap costs roughly $2,400 of annual purchasing power by year 5 versus the baseline. Over the entire 5-year span, the cumulative shortfall across pay periods adds up to several $1,000s that never made it into savings, never paid down debt, never built a cushion. If your plan was to set aside $200 a month, this gap can erase a full year of progress. That's a down payment delayed. That's an emergency fund stuck at 2 months instead of 3. This is why the math feels unforgiving. You're not falling behind because of one bad decision. You're being priced out by a steady drift. And if the arithmetic alone can do that, the way the broader economy is shaped right now only amplifies the squeeze. How can the economy look strong while your account balance looks weak? It comes down to a recovery that doesn't lift everyone the same way. Some households are climbing fast, others are treading water, and a lot are sinking slowly. On paper, growth looks solid. In daily budgets, it feels like a squeeze. That split has a name, a K-shaped recovery. Here's the shape in real life. High earners are still reporting healthier pay bumps, around 4% on average. Middle-income workers land closer to 2%. Lower-income workers scrape by with about 1%. Same country, different tracks. The top line says wages are rising. The bottom line says the raises don't meet the bills. When you stack that next to higher prices, those growth rates create entirely different realities. Now put that into a split screen. On the left, a household sitting at the median. They drop premium streaming, choose one shared plan, and switch to store brands at the grocery. They trim the weekly shop by swapping fresh cuts for frozen and limiting snacks. They juggle utility payments to avoid late fees and hold off on a needed dental visit another month. On the right, a high-earning couple with bonuses still coming in. They're not struggling to cover rent, but they shelve a $45,000 kitchen renovation. They push a European vacation to next year and trade a luxury SUV lease for another 6 months with the current car. Both screens show restraint. The reasons are different, but the end result is the same. Less discretionary spending. Spending data backs up the divergence. Essentials take a larger share for lower and middle incomes, crowding out non-essentials. Discretionary categories, dining out, entertainment, apparel, see softer growth or outright pullbacks among these groups. Higher income households still spend, but they're shifting from big-ticket items to smaller treats and experiences with shorter commitments. So the steakhouse night might stay, yet the second home renovation waits. Retailers feel the split. Discount grocers, off-price chains, and value menus get a lift, while premium retailers and big home projects face slower traffic. Why does inflation bite harder at the bottom? Budget composition. Lower-income households spend most of their money on housing, groceries, utilities, and transportation. When those prices rise, there's nowhere to offset the hit. There isn't a large travel budget to trim or a set of subscriptions to cancel that makes a dent. A $10 jump in a weekly grocery bill matters when the rest of the month is already spoken for. For higher earners, essentials are a smaller slice of income, so they can delay optional purchases and still feel stable until they can't. After-tax wages tell the same story. When you net out taxes, a 2% raise loses ground against 3% inflation. A 4% raise can keep pace, but only if spending patterns don't expand at the same time. And they often do. The result is a widening spread in real purchasing power. One group is forced to cut basics to preserve a zero balance month. Another trims luxuries to keep savings on track. Both decisions flow through to the economy. Here's where it gets interesting. What happens when even comfortable households pull back? Service businesses reliant on big discretionary outlays feel it first. Contractors, furniture stores, luxury travel, elective healthcare. Those sectors slow hiring, reduce hours, or offer discounts. Meanwhile, the households on the left side of that split screen already cut down to essentials, so there isn't much more to trim without missing payments. Weakness spreads from premium discretionary to mainstream retail to everyday services. It doesn't crash at once, it frays. The mini payoff is this. Two very different realities create one shared outcome. Slower consumer demand. Lower and middle income families spend less because they must. Higher income households spend less because they choose to wait. The economy doesn't care why dollars don't move. It only reacts when they stop moving. Sales soften, inventories turn slower, promotions start earlier, and hiring cools at the edges. That feedback loop raises the risk that job openings decline, which tightens wallets further and pushes more households into defensive mode. And that takes us to the human side of the split. Now meet someone who did all the right things and still got squeezed. A master's degree, a steady job, then the floor drops out. That's Austin in New York, 34, with an MFA and a resume that should open doors. He works at his family's construction business, but it's closing within a month or two. That means unemployment, no severance, and the same bills that already leave almost nothing left at the end of each pay period. He's been hunting for a lifeline for a year. About 1,000 applications sent across teaching, construction, and anything adjacent. No offers. The job board pings keep coming, but the callbacks don't. Degrees and diligence don't block rising costs. Rent moves first. His one bedroom takes a bigger bite every renewal. Groceries run higher each week, and the cart looks thinner anyway. The student loan auto draft hits in the middle of the month, right when utilities stack up with their own surcharges. He wants to support his partner in vet school and keep their plans on track. But every new month feels like a reset to zero. We work full-time and have degrees, and we're getting nowhere. It's not a line for effect, it's a daily reality. Walk through Austin's budget. Rent is the anchor, well over a third of take-home. Utilities swing with season, but the baseline creeps up. Electric, gas, internet, and the service fees that never go down. Transit passes aren't optional in New York, and a couple of ride shares a month fill the gaps when late shifts run past the last train. Groceries come in 2 runs. A big shop early, a filler run later for basics that didn't stretch. Protein costs push him to rotate cheaper cuts and more eggs. Then minimums, the student loan payment, a lingering credit card bill, and a small balance from a medical visit last fall that never fit cleanly into a tight month. The job loss risk adds a second hit, benefits. Employer health coverage goes away when the company shutters. Cobra is too expensive to carry for long, so he weighs marketplace plans with higher deductibles against the risk of skipping coverage. Dental and vision drop entirely unless he pays out of pocket. That means a cracked filling waits, the regular eye exam waits. Instead, he scrambles for side income, weekend shifts on a crew, gig tasks that pay 2 days later, selling a couple of tools he doesn't use often. The cash helps, but the hours kill interview prep and sap energy he needs to keep applying. The search itself wears him down. He tailors resumes, writes targeted cover letters, builds portfolios for roles he could do with his eyes closed, then hears nothing. He applies below his skill level because rent doesn't care about fit. He's competing with hundreds of applicants for entry-level jobs, and every listing wants 3 years of experience for a starter wage. The inbox fills with automated rejections, and the rare interview often ends with, "We went with an internal candidate." He's not alone, but that doesn't pay the Con Ed bill. Zoom out, and the macro wins aren't helpful. The odds of unemployment nudging higher put more people into the same funnel. Job postings have thinned in the fields he knows best, widening the gap between open roles and the number of applicants. Meanwhile, the strain at the edges shows up in places you'd rather not see it. Subprime auto delinquencies at 60-plus days past due hit their highest mark since tracking began in the early 1990s. Car payments are usually last to slip, which tells you how close to the line many households run. If one person feels this much pressure, how many more are one disruption away? The answer shows up in smaller choices. He cancels one streaming service, then another. He defers a routine doctor visit. He picks up cheaper staples and keeps the receipt to track the creep. The smallest surprises become problems. A coworker's birthday dinner becomes a polite, "can't make it." A noisy dishwasher becomes, "we'll hand wash for now." When the buffer's a few $100s, there's no room for a week between freelance checks or a mismatch in payroll timing. Here's the mini payoff. In a budget where 95% of income covers rent, utilities, transit, groceries, and debt minimums, a single job loss isn't a setback, it's a cliff. Savings don't stretch. Credit fills the gap at higher rates and minimums rise next month. Health coverage lapses unless he pays more for less. The math flips fast from careful balancing to triage. That's how a career speed bump becomes a financial crisis in a few weeks, even for someone who did the right things. Beyond Austin, the pattern points to a bigger drain. Necessities are eating almost every dollar. What happens when your paycheck covers needs and nothing else? You stop planning and start reacting. Every month becomes a race to pay the basics before the next bill hits, and one small surprise can flip the whole plan. Researchers define paycheck to paycheck as spending 95% or more of income on essentials. That's housing, food, utilities, transportation. At that level, there's no slack. Savings don't grow, investments never start, and an $80 copay or a $200 repair turns into a balance on a card you hope to keep clean. 24% of households sit in that zone right now, which means tens of millions of budgets are balanced on a razor's edge. For them, discretionary spending isn't cutting back. It's gone. Let's break down the big four. Rent leads. Renewal letters arrive with higher numbers, and moving isn't cheap either. Median home prices jumped from about $329,000 in early 2020 to $413,500 by late summer. So even the exit ramp into ownership is steeper. Groceries are next. A dozen large eggs cost around $3.60 on average today, after peaking above $6 in March, compared to roughly $1.40 before the pandemic. That single item tells the story of a basket that keeps shifting. Utilities have layered on new fees and surcharges, from delivery charges to fuel adjustments that don't roll back quickly. Transportation rounds it out. Gas, maintenance, insurance, and car payments have climbed together, and nothing in that stack looks temporary. You feel it in daily choices. The grocery run swaps a fresh produce mix for more frozen vegetables and bulk rice. The weekly staples drop brand names for generics, and snacks leave the cart. Utility bills add small line items, storm recovery infrastructure fees, usage tiers that add up over a year. Auto insurance premiums ratchet up at renewal with higher base rates and costlier repairs baked into the model. Car payments creep and the average term stretches so the monthly number stays high longer. Now the trap, credit card relief. When the essentials take 95% of income, the card becomes a tool to keep the lights on. Banks are seeing more households make only the minimum payment. The minimum goes up because balances and rates are higher, but the principal barely moves. Interest compounds, so next month's minimum rises again. At the same time, a separate group is still paying in full, which masks the stress. That split hides the pressures sitting under the surface for the quarter of households leaning on plastic to fill basic gaps. Stress is loudest at the margins, and the auto market is flashing red. Subprime borrowers at least 60 days late on car loans hit 6.65% in October, the highest since the early 1990s. Car payments are usually the last to miss because people need the vehicle to work. So when those delinquencies climb past great financial crisis peaks, it signals budgets can't absorb much more. It's not just a number, it's missed shifts, longer commutes on public transit, and jobs at risk when transportation fails. With budgets pinned, cuts move from wants to needs. First go the extras, dining out, subscriptions, upgrades. Next, maintenance gets delayed. Oil changes stretch an extra 1,000 miles. Dental cleanings wait. Then preventive care gives way to urgent care, which costs more later. You can skip new clothes, but you can't skip the power bill. The longer the essentials stay elevated, the more brittle the household becomes because every deferred task grows teeth. Here's the mini payoff. High fixed costs, rent, groceries, utilities, transportation, lock most of the paycheck before the month even begins. When those costs rise together, delinquencies climb. Credit card minimums inch up, auto loans slip at the edges. Resilience falls because there's nothing left to absorb shocks. It's a system wired to break under small stress, not just big ones. A blown tire becomes a debt spiral. A short paycheck becomes a missed payment, and the next month starts with less room than the last. Even high earners aren't immune. Their squeeze looks different. Fewer big-ticket purchases, delayed projects, and a shift from upgrades to holding patterns. But the pressure is real, and it ripples through the same services and stores that rely on their spending. Why are six-figure earners delaying milestones too? If you clear $100,000 or more, you'd think the big goals keep moving forward. Yet, more of these households are tapping the brakes because the math feels tighter than it used to. Lifestyle creep explains part of it. As income rises, spending follows, and what once felt like a treat turns into a baseline. Upgraded rentals become expected neighborhoods. 2 streaming bundles become the normal plan. Weekly dining out moves from celebration to routine. Over time, those wants get recast as needs. Add higher prices, and the budget locks in a cost structure that's harder to roll back when uncertainty shows up. Here's the tension. Even with strong pay, elevated prices push major choices into the future. Airfare is higher, hotels run hotter, and home materials cost more. Financing is pricier too, so the monthly payment on a new car or renovation no longer slides in neatly. That's why you see new cars deferred, home renovations paused, and vacations scaled back. The plans didn't vanish. They slipped into next quarter or next year because the after-tax, after-essential space got thinner. The cuts look specific. A couple that planned a kitchen remodel decides to wait for quotes to cool. A family keeps a paid-off SUV another year and postpones a lease. A team trip becomes a long weekend instead of a 2-week itinerary. Upgrades drop from the card. Business class downgrades to economy. Gym memberships consolidate. Wine club renewals skip a cycle. These are not emergencies. They're recalibrations that keep savings steady and reduce the chance of an ugly card balance later. The psychology shifts too. Status goods lose some pull when risk feels closer. Security jumps the line. Big-ticket items that project success matter less than a cash buffer that handles a surprise. Anxiety about future costs creeps in and people ask a different question. What protects me if prices stay high another year? That question changes behavior. Fewer splurges, more attention to recurring costs, more appreciation for liquidity than for the latest release. Data lines up with these choices. A notable share of high-income households report living paycheck to paycheck, even at levels above $300,000. The paycheck covers a larger lifestyle: mortgage in a premium zip code, childcare, private school, dining, travel. But it still behaves like a paycheck when fixed costs swell. Meanwhile, many six-figure earners are postponing big plans. Dream vacations get delayed, home renovations wait, and new cars sit on the lot longer. A smaller slice is even pushing back on buying a home or major life events because the carry costs don't pencil out cleanly right now. You can see the behind-the-scenes adjustments. People still show up where it's visible, but they offset elsewhere. Economy seats instead of upgrades. Discount grocers instead of specialty shops. Thrifted pieces mixed with new staples. Subscriptions reduced or canceled. It's a quiet reallocation. Maintain social markers while trimming the invisible line items that drain cash each month. That preserves the look of normal while rebuilding a cushion that feels safer. There's a paradox in play. Wealthier households continue to consume, but they shift to experiences or smaller luxuries with shorter commitments. A long-haul renovation pauses, but restaurant nights stay alive. Designer purchases give way to mid-tier brands with limited drops. Travel remains on the calendar, just shorter or closer to home. The spending map redraws from heavy, long-term spending to lighter, flexible outlays that can be cut quickly if the outlook darkens. If top earners pull back, ripple effects show up fast in services and retail. Contractors see fewer signed contracts. Furniture stores face slower turns. Luxury travel, elective healthcare, and premium fitness face softer bookings. Retailers respond with promotions and smaller inventories, which means fewer hours and trimmed staff on the margin. That spillover doesn't crash demand all at once. It cools the rooms that were warmest, and those rooms quietly power a lot of local economies. Here's the mini payoff. Inflation doesn't only squeeze budgets at the bottom, it reshapes spending maps across the income spectrum. For households with ample means, the pressure shows up as deferred cars, paused remodels, and narrowed vacations. For households in the middle, it shows up as fewer extras and more careful basics. At both ends, the discretionary slice shrinks, and the types of purchases that keep service businesses busy start to thin out. Move the needle on those categories long enough, and it changes hiring, hours, and what gets stocked on shelves. The youngest workers step into this environment with their first real budgets, and they feel the headwind right away. Starting adult life when essentials cost more than expected? What gives? You line up a starter job, plan a basic budget, and then the totals don't match. Groceries run higher than you thought. Rent takes a bigger bite. Utilities add fees you didn't see coming. You didn't miscalculate? The baseline moved on you before you even got started. Gen Z is adjusting in all the ways personal finance advice recommends. You're saving where you can, paying down debts faster when a little extra shows up, and cutting expenses that don't serve you. You swap to discount grocery stores, stick to store brands, and trim dining out. You pick cheaper phone plans, cancel overlapping subscriptions, and steer social plans toward low-cost hangouts. If family support helped last year, that support often shrank this year, so the budget leans more on your own cash flow. The theme is self-sufficiency, even if it means saying no to things that used to be normal. Here's the tension. Good habits don't change the fact that many still don't have 3 months of emergency savings. A lot of you are building a buffer from scratch while prices run hot. That means milestones slide. Moving out takes longer. Buying a car waits until repair bills make the old one a risk. Starting to invest competes with rent day. You're not avoiding adulthood, you're triaging it. The daily cost surprises are loud. Groceries top the pain list. That weekly shop stretches less, so you rebuild meals around cheaper staples and stretch protein with beans, rice, and eggs. Meanwhile, rent keeps drifting up at renewal, and the fees included part rarely means what it used to. Utilities now carry extra line items, delivery charges, infrastructure surcharges, usage tiers that push a bill up a band after a few hot days of AC. Even if total usage doesn't spike, the bill does. Dining out becomes a deliberate plan, not a default, because a fast casual night for two can rival a small grocery run. Dating budgets show the shift. Coffee over dinner, free events over ticketed nights, split checks more often or take turns hosting at home. It's not about being cheap, it's about keeping room for rent, transit, and loan payments. Life plans adjust too. Roommates are sticking together longer. Engagement and wedding timelines stretch as venues, travel, and gifts stack up. Some push graduate school or relocations because the carry costs don't pencil out if a job takes time to land. A big part of the stress is perception colliding with reality. Expectations formed in 2019 meet 2025 prices. A starting salary that sounded fine on paper doesn't stretch across today's housing and food costs. You might feel like you're underperforming, but the math says the target moved. When the first few years of work feel like catching up, it's easy to think you're late. You're not late. You're starting on a steeper hill. That's it for today. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more updates you won't want to miss.